Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. All right, in today's podcast, I'm going to talk about how to make great mistakes and why this is good for your organization. Recently, I had a conversation with a prospect who called me up, and we usually chat a little bit about our background and our history. How'd you get in the business? How'd you get in the industry? That sort of thing. And I said, well, tell me, what prompted your call today? What's on your mind? And usually they've told me about this in advance. They send a note in the form that says, hey, I'm really concerned about the team making mistakes, too many mistakes. And often that's just what was on their mind that day. And sometimes they say, well, I put a thing in there about making two mistakes, but here's what's really on my mind. But this guy was really focused on mistakes. It says we're making too many mistakes. I just don't feel like people understand their jobs. And he went on and on about, and I said, well, tell me about more of the mistakes. And he went through some detail. It's all stuff you've heard before. And it's fairly normal stuff. And yeah, was there some sloppy work in there? There absolutely was some sloppy work. And I already know that when I'm hearing about sloppy work, this is something that starts at the top. And when he finally pauses, I start my routine. I start, putting some ideas out there to see how he feels about them and what he's going to do about it. And I went straight for the throat. I said, I am so glad your people are making mistakes. That is awesome. And I could see him go, oh, this just went terribly wrong. Let's go, what do you mean? Tell me what's so great about this. Tell me why I should be happy about this. So I said, I'm not saying you should be happy. Okay. We want them to make good mistakes. All right. And you're talking about bad mistakes. And so rather than try and stop all mistakes from happening, let's just start understanding what are the mistakes that are good mistakes and what are the mistakes that are bad mistakes. He goes, how can there be a good mistake? What in the world is a good mistake? Well, a good mistake is something we learn from, right? A good mistake is something that identifies a problem that we can solve in perpetuity, that we can fix a process, we can better define something, we can create new lines of communication or understanding. That's a good mistake. A bad mistake is something that we just kind of, cover up and move on, or we yell at somebody and we move on. We don't do anything to understand the nexus of the mistake. Where did this come from? How do we keep it from happening again? And so as we talk about mistakes, and obviously that's what I want to talk about today, is I want to talk about mistakes, because many of the mistakes that we fret about aren't worth the cost to avoid. They're just the things that are going to happen, and therefore we need to expect them to happen, and our processes need to allow for that. When I had a team and they'd come to me and say, hey, we had this mistake, I said, well, tell me what happened, right? What's the thing? Why am I asking? I'm asking because was it a mistake in the process, right? Did the process allow this mistake to happen? Was it a mistake in attention to the detail of the process? In other words, was it a human error where a person allowed it to happen and another person was supposed to catch it? And in a good process, it takes two people for a mistake to happen, because there should always be checks and balances through the process. Or is the mistake inherent in the talent and skill levels of the people that you employ or utilize? Now, process mistakes are easy. We need to add a step here. There's a double check that we're missing. One of the most common stories I use for this is we left it on the dock, right? We get out on the show site, we're missing this thing. We call back to the shop. Oh, here it is. It got pushed aside. Looks like somebody used it for a table, or they used that case for wheels and forgot to put it back, or they set a box on top of it. UPS came in, we set the box on top of it. It covered the label. It didn't go on the truck. That's a process mistake, right? Human error triggered it, but human error is going to happen, and the process didn't allow for that. So when we prep a show, we're checking off each item, we're double checking it in the stack, and then when we put it on the truck, we have to check it off again. It's a manifest. So we need to double check that everything that we prepped actually goes on the truck, and then we'd be missing the case and we'd be going and looking for it, and there it is. Take the cardboard box off of it. Here it is. Okay, who moved this here? Don't do that again. Thank goodness we caught it. And we move on. So understanding what happened in the mistake is important. Now, for some companies, their processes are not defined. Their processes are basically the application of sheer will and determination to get the show out the door or get the proposal done or whatever it might be. And they don't expect to have to duplicate that effort again because each job is unique. Oh my goodness, we can't have a process because then we can't customize every order. So not having any processes is a diagnostic. So I'm talking to a company doesn't really have processes. That always starts at the top. I'm a process person. I'm never going to have an organization under me that doesn't have processes because that's how I'm wired. But not everybody's wired that way. So who's the person in your company? Who's the person on your leadership team or your management team or your supervisors who is process oriented? Because that's a great place to start. Let the people who like process put processes in place, and then we can balance out their need for detail and having a syndicated way of doing things, which is going to be rejected by other people in the company who don't like process, but we can find that happy balance. But if you want your business to succeed in the long run, you're going to have to embrace some sort of process. You're going to have to embrace mistakes and where they fit into developing processes and improving processes. So we need a better relationship with mistakes than, this happened and now I'm screwed, right? Which doesn't help me. That gives me no way out. That gives me no potential upside. We can't understand the benefit of it if we're focused on how it affects you personally, which is really what that's all about, right? When we get wound up about mistakes, that is personal. It's not about the organization. It's about how it affects you. And getting in touch with your feelings about mistakes will help you through this. Now, as I've alluded to, a lot of times the solution to mistakes is things that are not palatable to everybody in the business. And that's what compromise is all about, right? Compromise is when a bunch of people get together, figure out the way forward, and nobody's happy about it, right? That's compromise in a nutshell. However, what we can do is learn that we're going to be happy about this because it's going to be better than it was before. And that's what we want to focus on. So getting teams together to talk about how we're going to compromise on this so that we can move forward is about helping everybody see how giving something up gives them something else that they weren't going to get before. Everybody's going to give something up. Everybody's going to get a benefit out of this, and we're going to move on. And this iterative process of compromising gets us to a better place where mistakes are not so prevalent. So there's no risk. You don't mitigate any risk if you don't change, right? So many of you desperately need to change, which means that you're going to have to deal with the risk of change. A mistake is a risk, and a mistake is an output. So if we're going to reduce the number of mistakes, we're going to have to embrace some risk to make the changes that go into this. And what are the risks that we're talking about? I had an owner one day who as many owners in our industry, fervently believe that only staff technicians are going to have care and duty for every job and go out and do a good job. And the fact is that's not really true. There are a lot of really good freelancers out there who probably care as much or more about the job than some of your people. But if we're not exposed to those people, we don't realize that that's out there. And so lack of processes forces us to bring people inside our business so that they learn how to work in the system. But if the system doesn't have processes, there's not really a system there. They're just people that you're comfortable with, and they know how to hide the mistakes and move on. They know how to work in your system of chaos and reaction, which is highly common in our industry. So making the change to reduce mistakes is also a commitment to embracing something that's outside of our comfort zone, which is often outsiders, right? A lot of change is going to come from the outside. Inside processes struggle because you're rebreathing your own air, right? You're in that knowledge vacuum where the same people and the same ideas and the same solutions keep getting relitigated over and over again, which is why we never get to a point where we can change, because we don't have that fresh idea that's a tiebreaker, which brings us to the whole issue of, leadership. And I don't talk a lot about leadership and leadership coaching because there's a whole discipline out there, and many of them are charlatans and many of them are quite brilliant people. But to sit down with a person and say, hey, the entire problem here is not that your team is making mistakes, is that you're a lousy leader. You need to improve your leadership, because that's how we introduce process and that's how we pull people along. But when your audience is a lot of accidental entrepreneurs who never signed up to be a leader, they were just the person who was really good at putting on a show or really good at managing a client or really good at paying attention to details, and all of a sudden they had a business thrown up around them, it's kind of unfair to tell them, well, you need to work on being a better leader, when in fact they never asked for this role. They just ended up with it. So how do we introduce the concept of leadership into an organization where the person at the top is not inherently a leader personality or a leader type? And that's okay. We do it through management teams, right? We delegate leadership to people, to individuals within the organization, or an individual within an organization, that allows you to get things done. And leaders are going to look at mistakes, and they're going to look at them differently. So if I have a mistake culture where mistakes are always the problem, and we're always trying to fix mistakes through job cost control and, that kind of thing, we're trying to prevent mistakes from happening, and it's taking up all of our time and energy, so we can't make any permanent improvements. We're just trying to fix one job at a time by tamping down mistakes. I know inherently that I've got a leadership problem. And it's not that I don't have leaders within the organization. I don't have a process, there's that word again, for those leaders to manifest. So how do we allow leaders to manifest inside of an organization so that we can make good mistakes and fix the bad mistakes? Well, that's a bigger question, but it is kind of part and parcel of what consultants like I do in a change management situation. We're trying to help the entire organization change the way that it runs itself. And management teams are the solution. Yes, I coach owners, but I often am coaching owners on how to develop and embrace a management team. And then I coach management teams on how to be better managers and play to their strengths and develop the processes and set the policies that we need to get things done. So there's another element of mistake culture, is if I'm finding a culture that is so focused on mistakes, I often will find a culture that doesn't have a lot of policies in place. And policies, we're big business, we have policies. It's like, get over yourselves, right? We need policies. Policies are very important for management teams because, number one, first of all, policies are going to reduce stress because a lot of the decisions are made through policy, and we're not fretting about stuff. We're not arguing about stuff. We're just applying the policy. And sometimes it's distasteful, but the fact is, ultimately, it reduces stress and it reduces the amount of time that we spend in a stressful indecision point while we scramble around and try and remember what the policy is. And then we apply the policy and everything is fine again. Policies speed up decision making. A management team that has a policy knows how to make a decision. If they can't make a decision, it's generally because there's not a policy there. So rather than litigating the decision they want to make, Let's talk about what the policy needs to be that's going to tell us what the decision should need to be. You know, I had a happened with a couple of clients this past week where, here's an employee who wants a different type of computer. They have a workstation and they need a laptop, and management doesn't want to give them a laptop for all sorts of reasons that they cannot really say. Maybe they don't feel the person's responsible. Maybe they think it costs too much money. Maybe they just don't think anybody has the right to ask this sort of thing. But the fact is, they had no policy in place about who needs a laptop versus who needs a workstation. So rather than debate why or whether or not this person needs to get a laptop, because as soon as they get one, somebody else is going to want one, and we're going to go through it all over again. Let's spend 5 minutes and say, what's the policy behind this? And lo and behold, the policy that made sense to them said that guy should have a laptop. I mean, it was pretty simple. But the fact is, we're trying to solve the wrong problem. And the problem is often that we don't have policies. And then the other thing that policies do is they give authority to the management team so that they can make decisions and get things done. So people understand that they're applying a policy, not making a personal decision or a one-off decision or an emotional decision. They're actually going back to the policy, which makes it easier for people to accept. Perfect example of this, like all companies, the business I worked for, we struggled getting, show people who traveled for a living to turn in their expense reports, right? It was like pulling teeth. Weeks, sometimes a month, reconcile your credit card statement, turn in an expense report, quit running to Home Depot to buy stuff, quit going to the electronics store to get stuff on your break, that we don't need, quit solving a problem with a credit card. All of these things. And it's because while we had the policy that you need to fill out an expense report, it was the wrong policy. We didn't solve the problem, and eliminate a whole slew of purchasing mistakes and overspending until we changed how the policy was applied. So what we ended up doing through a series of finance decisions that were out of our control from our parent company was we took back everybody's Amex card and we gave them a new Amex card that was in their name and the bill came to their house. And we gave them an electronic way to file their expenses and get reimbursed immediately. And they now, in order to pay their Amex bill, they had to write a check themselves, which means they had to fill out their expense report, which you would think would make everybody great at filling out expense reports. But here's what it did instead. They quit buying stuff. Yeah, they just quit buying stuff. No Home Depot runs. All of a sudden, everything went through purchasing. They called the shop and say, hey, we need this. Can you get this for us? All that indiscriminate spending just went away because we found the right policy. So it's an interesting topic. It's a great place to start a conversation. How you manage mistakes inside your organization or how you process mistakes inside your organization tells me a lot about how you're wired. It tells me a lot about how we're going to have to work with you to get you to a better place so that you can achieve your goals, make more money, take long vacations, sleep at night, enjoy yourself, maybe have a succession plan one day, all those things that owners want. If you want to have the harmony and the peace inside your organization, you want to see people working and playing well together, okay, learn to embrace mistakes. Mistakes lead to process change, which leads to policy, which leads to empowerment, which leads to progress. All of those things are tied together. Your business is one holistic organism that feeds on itself. Let's nourish it well. And policies are the key at this, and teaching a management team how to develop policies and apply them and change them when they need to be changed is paramount to helping your organization evolve. So thanks for the question. Thanks for bringing this on. Thanks for listening to me today, and get out there and please make some great mistakes. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.